I had never seen Lauren that sick before. What started as what we both thought was food poisoning quickly escalated. She was throwing up constantly and couldn't even keep water down. At first, she brushed it off, saying it would pass, but by the second day, she looked pale and weak, like she might collapse at any moment. I told her we were going to the hospital, no matter how much she hated needles or IVs. To my surprise, she didn't argue, which scared me even more. Lauren was the type to avoid doctors at all costs, so her silent agreement told me this was serious. When we arrived at the emergency room, they took her in almost immediately. I sat next to her, holding her hand while nurses hooked her up to and for. She looked terrified, and I did my best to calm her down, but there was a sinking feeling in my chest the entire time. Something didn't feel right, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. After a few hours, the 4 fluid started to help. Her color improved slightly, and though she was still too weak to sit up, at least she wasn't throwing up anymore. The doctors said they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. They ran a series of tests to figure out what was causing her symptoms, but nothing seemed immediately urgent. I felt a wave of relief, thinking maybe it really was just food poisoning or a stomach virus. By the second day, her condition seemed to stabilize. I stayed by her side the entire time, barely leaving her room except to grab coffee. The doctors didn't provide many answers, but they seemed confident it wasn't anything life-threatening. I started to let my guard down, assuming we'd be heading home soon and I'd be taking care of her while she recovered. Then a nurse came in with an envelope. She said the doctor would explain everything soon, but I couldn't wait. Sitting next to Lauren while she slept, I opened it. At first, the words on the paper didn't even register. My eyes scanned the document repeatedly, but my brain refused to process it. Positive for chlamydia. I froze. It felt like the entire room was closing in on me. My hands started shaking as I gripped the paper. I kept telling myself there had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe the samples were mixed up, or there had been a lab error. But deep down, I knew the truth. Desperate for answers, I grabbed my phone and started searching online, hoping there was some other explanation. There wasn't. Every article I read confirmed the same thing. This didn't just happen. Someone had to bring it into the relationship. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at my phone, reading the same information over and over. My heart was racing, and my mind was spinning with questions I didn't want to face. How? When? Who? Eventually, the doctor came in and confirmed the report's accuracy. Lauren needed to start antibiotics immediately. He spoke about treatment plans and follow-ups, but I barely heard him. My mind was stuck on what this meant, what it had to mean. Lauren was still asleep, looking fragile and completely unaware of the bomb that had just gone off in our lives. I sat there, staring at her, trying to figure out how we had ended up here. I wanted to wake her up and demand answers, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I stayed frozen in my chair, the paper still clutched in my hand, my stomach in knots. The woman I trusted, the woman I thought I knew, had brought this into our lives. No matter how much I wanted it to be a mistake, I couldn't unsee the truth written on that page. Time passed in a blur. It felt like hours before Lauren finally stirred. My chest tightened as her eyes fluttered open. She gave me a weak smile, looking relieved to see me sitting there. That smile made my stomach turn. Without a word, I handed her the report. She blinked a few times, trying to focus on the paper. The moment her eyes locked on the results, her entire expression changed. The color drained from her face, and her lips began to tremble. "I can explain," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Something snapped inside me. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Explain what, Lauren?" My voice was sharp, louder than I intended, but I didn't care. "Explain how you tested positive for an STD while we're married. Explain how this happened when we haven't even been intimate for months because you've been too tired or not in the mood." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. "Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I wouldn't figure it out? Tell me, Lauren, Who was it? Or should I say, who were they? She broke down completely, covering her face with her hands as she sobbed uncontrollably. I wasn't moved, not this time. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to let her cry her way out of it. Finally, between sobs, she began to talk. At first, her words were scattered and incoherent. But as she continued, the truth became clear. What she told me next was worse than anything I could have imagined. Lauren admitted to meeting multiple men through her job at the salon. She said it started as harmless flirting but escalated. She began making excuses to meet up with them after work, convincing herself it would happen just once. But it wasn't once. It wasn't even a handful of times. It became a pattern, something she called her guilty pleasure. Her exact words, guilty pleasure, stung like a slap to the face. Like she was talking about sneaking a piece of chocolate cake on a diet, not cheating on her husband, not risking my health, not destroying everything we had built together. A guilty pleasure? Are you serious right now, Lauren? I was pacing by this point, my hands gripping my hair as I tried to process what I was hearing. Do you even understand what you've done? You put my health at risk. You put our marriage at risk. For what? For some thrill. She kept saying she was sorry, that she never meant for it to happen, that it was something she couldn't stop. But every apology felt hollow, empty. Nothing she said changed the fact that she had lied to me over and over again. How long? I demanded, my voice shaking. How long has this been going on? When she answered, over a year, it felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. A year. An entire year of lies. I asked her how many men there had been. Her response made my stomach churn. Too many to count, she admitted. Too many to count. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the chair I'd been sitting in and slammed it against the wall, the noise echoing in the small hospital room. Lauren flinched, startled. You ruined everything, Lauren. Everything. My voice cracked under the weight of my anger and pain. She begged me to calm down, to let her explain more, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't care about her excuses or her sob stories. When she reached out to touch my arm, I yanked it away like her touch burned me. Don't touch me, I said, my voice low and firm. I don't even know who you are anymore. Her cries followed me as I stormed out of the hospital room, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not after what I had just heard. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My hands were trembling, and my mind wouldn't stop replaying her words, especially the part where she called it her guilty pleasure. Those words echoed in my head like a broken record. I wandered through the hospital hallways in a daze until I eventually found myself outside, sitting in my car. I didn't drive away right away. I just sat there, staring at the dashboard, feeling like my entire life had been flipped upside down in the span of a few hours. I couldn't process it. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and angrier than I'd ever been in my entire life. The rage was so intense it made my whole body feel hot. After what must have been an hour, I realized I couldn't just sit there anymore. I needed to act, to take control of the situation, or I was going to lose my mind. I started the car and drove home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I walked into our apartment, it felt different. Like I was stepping into a place that didn't belong to me anymore. Everything in there reminded me of her. The candles she loved to collect. The framed photos of us smiling like idiots. Her clothes hanging neatly in the closet. It made me sick. I grabbed a couple of garbage bags and started packing up her things. Clothes, shoes, makeup, everything. I didn't care about organizing it neatly. I just wanted it gone. I didn't want to see any trace of her. The smell of her perfume still lingered in the bedroom, and it felt like it was suffocating me. When I finished, I loaded her things into the trunk of her car, which was parked in the basement garage. I didn't even bother locking it. If she wanted her stuff, she could take it. I didn't care. After that, I called a cleaning service and told them I wanted a deep clean. Every surface scrubbed, every corner sanitized, I know it sounds extreme, but I felt like she had contaminated the whole place. I couldn't even sit on the couch without imagining her coming home after being with someone else. Then, I called a lawyer. I didn't waste any time. I wanted to start the divorce process immediately. The thought of being legally tied to her for even one more day made my skin crawl. The hardest part came later that night, when my phone started buzzing. It was Lauren, calling and texting nonstop. At first, I ignored it, but after the fifth call, I finally picked up. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She begged me to come back, to talk to her, to give her a chance to make things right. She said she was scared and alone in the hospital, and that she needed me. I wanted to feel something, sympathy, guilt, anything, but all I felt was rage. Are you kidding me, Lauren? I snapped. You're scared? You need me? Where was that energy when you were sneaking around behind my back? Where was that fear when you were risking my health and our marriage? She kept crying, insisting it wasn't like that. I never meant to hurt you, but I cut her off. I don't care what you meant, I said coldly. You did this. You broke us. And now you can deal with the consequences. I hung up before she could say anything else and turned off my phone. I didn't need to hear her apologies or excuses anymore. The next morning, I sent her a text letting her know her things were in her car and that I was done. I told her not to come back to the apartment and that I was filing for divorce. She tried calling again, but I didn't answer. I didn't even go back to the hospital. I couldn't bring myself to face her after everything that a couple of days later. The hospital called again. They told me Lauren was still there, and her bills were stacking up. They said she needed to make arrangements for payment before she could be discharged. I told them it wasn't my problem. I made it clear she was no longer my responsibility and hung up. At the time, that decision felt right. But later that night, doubt started creeping in, not guilt, just doubt. Was I being too harsh? Was this the right way to handle things? Every time I started to question myself, though, I remember her words. Guilty pleasure. The doubt vanished. Lauren eventually got discharged, but not because of me. She managed to get one of her co-workers to pick her up. I only knew because I saw her later that day when she showed up at the apartment. She looked awful, weak, pale, and clearly not fully recovered. Her co-worker helped her out of the car, and I could see she was struggling to walk. I didn't care. When she knocked on the door, I didn't answer at first. I just stood there, watching through the peephole as she leaned against the frame. Then I opened the door, just enough to let her know she wasn't coming in. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she had this desperate look that almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. Please, she said, her voice shaky. Just let me come in long enough to rest. I can't stay out here like this. I shook my head. Your stuff's in your car, Lauren. Take it and go. She tried to push the door open, but I held it firm. I'm sick, she pleaded. I can't do this alone. I didn't budge. You should have thought about that before you did what you did. Her co-worker, clearly uncomfortable, stepped in to try reasoning with me. I shut that down quickly. This is between me and her, I said, looking straight at Lauren. And as far as I'm concerned, there is no us anymore. Eventually, her co-worker gave up and left, leaving Lauren standing there. She kept knocking, crying, begging me to let her in. I couldn't. I watched from the window as she finally went down to the basement, grabbed her things, and sat in her car. She didn't drive off right away. She just sat there, crying. I turned away and didn't look back. Over the next few days, the messages started pouring in again. Somehow, Lauren found ways to contact me even after I blocked her number. Emails, messages through mutual friends. Anything she could think of to get my attention. Her tone shifted from apologies to anger. She called me heartless for leaving her like that, accused me of breaking our vows to stand by each other in sickness and in health. That accusation actually made me laugh. Sickness and health. What about the vows to stay faithful? To be honest, She threw all of that out the window the moment she decided our marriage wasn't enough for her. Word spread quickly. Her coworker must have told people what happened, and soon enough, it was all over her workplace. She ended up losing her job because of it. According to a mutual acquaintance, her manager didn't want the drama or the bad reputation that came with her situation. Lauren called me, furious, blaming me for ruining her life. I didn't even respond. What was I supposed to say? She did this to herself. Things only got worse for her after that. Her parents found out what happened. When she tried to spin the story to make herself the victim, they called me to get my side. I didn't hold back. I told them everything, the affairs, the STD, all of it. Her dad was furious. He even called her while I was still on the line and ripped into her. Her mom cried and apologized to me, but I didn't need their sympathy. I just wanted them to know the truth. After that, Lauren's life spiraled even more. She lost her job, burned bridges with her family, and started bouncing between cheap motels and friends' couches. I heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances, but I didn't reach out. I was done saving her. She made her choices. Now she had to live with them. Lauren didn't go down without a fight. I should have known better than to expect her to make the divorce easy. But I wasn't prepared for just how far she'd go to make things difficult. The first roadblock came almost immediately. My lawyer drafted the divorce papers and sent them to her, but instead of signing, she ignored them. Weeks passed with no response. No emails, no calls, nothing. I thought maybe she was finally giving up. Then one day, she showed up at my apartment again. I didn't let her in, but I opened the door just enough to talk. She stood there looking like hell. Bags under her eyes, hair unkempt, and wearing the same clothes I'd last seen her in. "I can't do this without you," she said, her voice cracking as tears started falling. "I need you. I'll do anything to fix this. Just give me a chance." I didn't say a word. I just handed her the papers and told her to sign them. That's when the crying stopped and the anger came out. She tore into me, accusing me of abandoning her, of being heartless, of turning my back on the vows we made. She threw every manipulative line she could think of at me, but none of it hit, not anymore. "You destroyed this marriage," I said, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Not me." She stormed off, and I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next few weeks, she dragged her feet, refusing to sign and coming up with excuses about being too sick to meet with a lawyer. Meanwhile, she bombarded me with messages, some begging, some threatening. She even told me she'd go public about how I abandoned her at the hospital if I didn't back off. I didn't care. Let her talk. People could believe whatever they wanted. I knew the truth. When that didn't work, she shifted tactics. She showed up to court looking frail, leaning hard into the role of the victim. She sobbed in front of the judge, talking about her health problems and depression, claiming she wasn't in the right mental state to handle a divorce. For a moment, I worried the judge might fall for it, but thankfully, the facts were on my side. My lawyer presented everything. The hospital reports, the timeline, even the text she sent admitting to the affairs. Lauren didn't deny any of it. She couldn't, but she tried to twist it, claiming she'd made a mistake and was seeking therapy to become a better wife. She begged for another chance. I wasn't interested. The judge didn't force her to sign right away, but he made it clear her health wasn't a valid excuse to delay the process indefinitely. That didn't stop her from fighting. She contested everything. Spousal support, asset division, even the apartment we lived in. I wanted it all over as quickly as possible, so I gave up more than I probably should have just to get her out of my life. Half of everything. That's what it cost me. Even after the settlement, she kept finding ways to disrupt my life. But I was done letting her control my emotions. This was my closure. No matter how much damage she left in her wake, she kept pushing. One evening, she showed up outside my apartment, crying and begging me to reconsider. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the look on her face when she called her affairs a guilty pleasure, and any pity I felt vanished. The final straw came when she emailed me, after the papers were signed, to tell me she was clean now. She said the treatment had worked, and her test came back negative, as if that somehow fixed everything. As if being free of the STD meant I should take her back. I didn't even respond. What was there to say? When my lawyer confirmed that the divorce was finalized, I felt relief, but it was far from satisfying. I had expected to feel free, maybe even happy. Instead, I felt drained, like I had spent every ounce of energy fighting to get out of quicksand, only to collapse on solid ground. Even then, Lauren didn't stop. She sent long emails about how she was changing, how losing me had been the wake-up call she needed to turn her life around. She begged for another chance, promising to be better this time. But it was too late, way too late. I stopped reading her messages after a while. I didn't need her apologies. I didn't need her explanations. I needed to move on, and nothing she said could change what she'd already done. When the divorce was finally over, I expected closure, maybe even peace. Instead, I felt numb. It was like I had been running on adrenaline for so long that, once it stopped, everything hit me at once. The anger, the exhaustion, the humiliation. It was all still there, simmering beneath the surface. At first, I tried to bury myself in work. I took on extra hours, volunteered for projects, anything to keep my mind occupied. It worked during the day. I felt productive, even normal. But nights were a different story. That's when the silence would hit, and my thoughts would start eating at me again. I'd replay conversations with Lauren over and over, picking apart every word, every sign I'd missed. I'd lie in bed wondering how I didn't see it sooner, how I let someone like that into my life and trusted her completely. Some nights, the anger came back, so strong I wanted to scream. Other nights, it was a sadness, a heavy weight that made it hard to breathe. The worst part wasn't losing Lauren. It was losing the life I thought we had. It was realizing that everything I believed about my marriage was a lie. I started going to therapy, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to turn into one of those bitter people who let their past ruin their future. I'll admit, I wasn't sold on it at first. Sitting in a room, talking about my feelings, felt useless. But over time, it helped .my therapist made me see things I hadn't before, like how much I let Lauren control my sense of worth, how I ignored red flags because I didn't want to believe she was capable of something like this. The hardest part was accepting that what happened wasn't my fault. For so long, I kept thinking that maybe if I had been more attentive, more affectionate, more exciting, she wouldn't have cheated. But the truth is, none of that would have mattered. What she did was about her, not me. After that, I started focusing on myself. I picked up hobbies I hadn't touched in years. I started hiking again, something I used to love but gave up because Lauren wasn't into it. I joined a gym, not to impress anyone, but because I needed an outlet for all the frustration still bottled up inside me. Slowly, things got better. The nightmares stopped. The random waves of anger became less frequent. I even started going out with friends again, something I didn't realize I had stopped doing so much when I was married. Lauren, on the other hand, didn't disappear completely. She kept sending emails, some apologizing, others trying to guilt me into talking to her. At one point, she even sent a long message about how she was ruined now. No job, no money, barely any friends. She said she hoped I was happy knowing how much she was suffering. I didn't respond. I didn't even feel angry reading it. I just felt nothing. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't tied to her drama. She wasn't my problem anymore. That realization felt like a weight lifting off my chest. It hasn't been easy moving forward, though. Trust is still hard for me. Anytime I meet someone new, there's this voice in the back of my head whispering, "What if it happens again?" I know it's something I need to work through, and I'm trying. I'm not ready for another relationship yet, but I'm okay with that. For now, I'm focused on myself, I'm rebuilding the parts of me that got torn apart in the process. Looking back, there are moments when I wonder how I let it get as bad as it did. But then I remind myself, I didn't fail. Lauren did. She made her choices, and she's the one who has to live with them. I've learned a lot from this, about boundaries, self-respect, and what I'll never tolerate again. And while I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, I can honestly say I'm stronger because of it. I'm still figuring things out, still working through the mess she left behind. But I'm moving forward. And for the first time in a long, long time, I feel like I'm in control of my life again.